Hello and welcome back to the conclusion of the matter. I'm Ren Ferguson. Joined with me as always is Robbie Santiago and Ryan Weaver. We're glad that y'all have come back to listen to another episode. We hope that this episode will be beneficial to you. If you have any comments or questions or suggestions, feel free to either comment on the YouTube video or you can even leave comments at least on Spotify on the episode. Or you can message us, reach out to us in some other way, and we'd be happy to email us at the conclusion of the matter at yahoo.com. But Solomon wrote in Ecclesiastes 12, 13, and 14, "Let us hear the conclusion of the matter, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all, for God will bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or evil." So I will hand it over to Robbie, and he'll lead our discussion.
Thanks, Ren. Well, today's going to be a topic that kind of gets mixed in with kind of the religious and political realm, and that's going to be abortion. So Ren mentioned that if you have comments, then feel free to drop those below this video on Spotify or on YouTube, or just tell us your comments in person if you're feeling brave that day. But I actually kind of wanted to start with this. When we talk about abortion, out of 100% of all of the abortions, 99.5, or at the very minimum, 99% of all abortions generally go back to not rape or incest or the health of the mother. 99+% of them are just that the birth control didn't work, or there was some kind of malfunction, or they just, weren't being careful, and oops, I'm pregnant now.
Yeah.
And now I need an abortion, quote unquote, need an abortion.
Yeah.
So that's what 99+% of abortions are. Now, before we get into those like 99.5-ish%, let's talk about some of the other ones like the life of the mother. And obviously, if the actual life of the mother is going to be, at risk, we're not talking about a life for another life here. Of course, I don't think we should just end the mother's life just because we think that the child may be at risk too. But a lot of times when the health of the mother is a consideration, it's not necessarily that she's going to die. In some cases it is, but in a lot of cases it's just that it's going to be a difficult pregnancy, and there's going to be, a lot of pain and suffering there. And I can even speak for myself, and I believe my sister too, that we were both born by C-section. Fortunately, our mother chose for both of us to be born instead of having an abortion for us. Now, we were planned and everything, but regardless, I don't think that we should end the life of a child just because it will be kind of a painful pregnancy. Now, all that to say is, that none of the three of us are going to get pregnant or anything. So, we don't necessarily know what that pain's going to go like.
In today's day,
It's
and
2025.
age, men can get pregnant.
Apparently so. And we are
That's
going to.
why they're called, what is it?
Birthing people. That's right. Yeah. So
that's another episode.
it's 2025, but I can say with a decent level of certainty that zero of the three of us will.
Yes.
But anyway, so that number of, about 0.5%, some of those will include the health of the mother, but then dealing with rape and incest as well. Something that I think separates the pro-life and pro-choice movement in terms of just philosophy is that they're arguing kind of about two different things, even though they're kind of related. The pro-choice movement will oftentimes argue that it's, her body, her choice, that men and or the government shouldn't tell a woman what she should do with her body. That's kind of how the argument is made on one side. On the other side, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the rights or not rights of the woman or anything. I think most people would agree that, women should have rights to the fullest extent that any other person will. But just like any right we talk about, we don't have the right to just do like anything that we want to do. And especially if I don't have the right to do something, if it's going to violate on the natural rights of somebody else. Like, even if I just like really, really, really want Ryan's house and it'll make me happy, I can't just like go and take it and just like, live there and break into his house and everything. Like, he might let me for like a few days if I'm like homeless.
State of Illinois had squatters' rights deal now where, that's, anyway, I digress.
That's a whole other issue.
I'm just saying, like, I don't have the right to break into your house
and take your house from
or like go in there and like take all of your stuff. Like, I really like all of his cardinals, like memorabilia and stuff. So it made me really happy to have it, and I think I should have the right to do it, and nobody can tell me that I can't. So I can't just go and like violate his natural rights and do whatever in the world that I want, especially if that means going into his house and murdering him. So I don't have just like free reign to do whatever I want, even like being in control of my own body to do all of those things. Yeah. But I will say, like, particularly like with the issue of rape, that's a very grotesque, a very like emotionally traumatic thing that they go for. But what the pro-life movement really focuses on is that third entity that's involved. Obviously, you have to have a man and a woman to make a baby, but then the third entity is that baby, is that, fetus, or, any of those terms that are used to define that. And so really the discussion for the pro-life movement particularly is, does that third entity deserve protection, and does that third entity have natural rights, or does it not? And so they're kind of arguing from two different sides. But because the three of us would probably agree that that third entity, that baby, it has intrinsic value from God. It has its own DNA. It has all of these other things.
And I think that's, that's another argument is, well, what really is it at that point in time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not from us, but their argument is it's not a human at this point.
Well, and that's where the whole my body, my choice comes into it, because they don't view it as a separate entity.
Yeah.
They view it as, they sometimes describe the child as a parasite or a tumor, things like that. And I think they use that type of terminology to honestly make themselves feel better about what they're doing.
Yeah.
It creates a separation between what they are, how they're perceiving it, and what they're actually doing, to use that type of terminology. But it's not her body. It is in her body, yes, but it's not her body. And I'm sure we'll talk about this more, about, when should we think of the child as being a living human? When does that life begin? What are some scientific things I'm sure we're going to get into in that vein to help support that argument. Mm-hmm. But it's not her body. That's the whole thing. It's not.
But I think that's kind of the differences of the 2 points of view here, is that, one side, bodily autonomy is the only factor, or at least the main factor that's involved, because, if you follow that to its logical conclusion, eventually, like, women may or may not have the ability to live the life that they want to live and be, equal with men or what have you. Yeah. And so if that's the only factor, and the only way to arrive at that is if that third entity is, not a non-factor, essentially. Yeah.
There was that actress a few years ago. I don't remember her name, but she got up. She was getting some award, and she got up and she thanked she thanked all of the children that she had aborted. Because without that, she wouldn't have been able to live the life that she had lived and done the things that she had done.
I did not know that.
And
absolutely,
I can't remember her name, but I mean that's how people view it. That's what they think of it.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's two, not opposites isn't the right word, but two points of view that are arguing different things, essentially. I guess, unless, Ryan, you had something you wanted to plug in real quick. I had several kind of quotes that are counter arguments from the other side. So let's start with this one. What if the mother and the father are unstable, or they're not able to provide the life that the child really deserves, and that child would go through a lot of suffering? And even like including like foster care or something like that, if they were to put it up through adoption, going through just a lot of,
But is that your choice? I mean, do we get to? I mean, that's an assumption, right? You don't know what's really going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, to say that, well, this child is never going to be a productive member of society, so we're just going to, why risk it? Let's just abort it. Right. I think that's not our place.
No, it's not. And the other thing you brought up in that example is, if the mother and the father are not in a place where they think they can raise the child, which we were talking about this earlier, then don't do the thing that creates the child. If you're not in a position where you could care for a child, don't do the thing that creates children.
All the fun and none of the responsibility. Yes. And I'll just say that, by going, you can't eliminate all suffering, no matter how old you are or at what age. And so, are you gauging, first of all, like to Ryan's point, it's an assumption that that's going to be the case, but should we just go out and kill any disadvantaged child? Like, of course not. That would, number one, that would be complete genocide, which is kind of what we're talking about.
Well,
anyway.
There's nations that push to, I think there's some nations in the Netherlands that push to abort Down syndrome children.
I think you're right. It may be the Netherlands. I thought it was like a Scandinavian country for some reason. Maybe. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah. I wanted to say it was like Norway or something like that.
Yeah, I was thinking Norway or Finland but something like that.
But you are correct. I've heard that as well. But like to that point, like we can't be the arbiters of what like the value of one life versus another life, which is kind of at the core of all of this. But number two is to like eliminate all suffering. We're not going to be able to do that. And it doesn't matter like what age. Like, are we going to eliminate any kid based on economic status that they would be going into, on, any kind of like social suffering at school or just in their social lives in general that they would go through, traumatic events like bad injuries that could happen in their childhood or even in their adulthood? Like, there's no way we could foresee all of that.
If that's the reasoning for it, then
it's the same. It's the car. It's like driving a car, kind of argument.
Well, I think it's the statistic that I've heard most recently is there's 50,000 car deaths a year, something like that, at least in the U.S. And this kind of gets into the whole gun control debate, which that's a totally
let's
different
punt
issue
on that one for today.
But the risk of suffering, does that mean that we should just do away with the vehicles? Or the risk of suffering in the context of what we're talking about here, does that mean that we should just abort the child so that they never have to face that potential suffering?
Yeah.
And I would honestly argue, and I'm not talking about extreme cases. I know there's abuse, physical, mental, emotional. I'm not talking about those things. But when we think about suffering is what makes us, I think, dependent on God. And it ought to strengthen our faith and our resolve, but it also makes us compassionate. It makes us sympathetic. It makes us empathetic. Mm-hmm. Suffering is not entirely bad in that sense. I trust y'all understand what I'm saying.
I think you're saying along the same line James did. Consider it all joy when you come
because it
various
produces
trials. Yeah, it's not
some good.
Not it's not fun going through it, but if and when you get through it, then you see the benefit. Right. I think is what you're.
Yes. Yeah. Basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, do you guys mind if we go into our next counter argument? Or
no.
Did you have anything else on that one?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Well, and this is kind of a big one. I know we were talking about this earlier, Ryan, that, well, it's just a clump of cells. The baby is not viable. And so I guess I'll kind of start us on this one. I think the three of us would agree that we believe that life begins at conception. And if you move away from that, and by conception, we're talking about when sperm meets egg, the reason that life begins there is because a unique DNA that's never existed now existed, and that DNA is going to determine eventually hair color, eye color, interest, personality type. It's its own unique life. It's not the exact DNA of the mother. It's not the exact DNA of the father. That it's a unique blend. Just like even outside of the room, my son Lucas is drastically different personality type and interest than either my wife or I.
The amazing thing is his genetic code is exactly the same now as it was at conception.
Exactly.
It has always been him.
And it'll be the same if he gets to be, 20 years old, 50-year-old, 100 years old.
The other interesting thing is another child comes along, same parents,
different
same DNA
code.
composition.
Yeah.
different
but
DNA.
different.
Yeah.
We don't have clones like in Star
Yeah.
Wars, right? It's not like, you know what I mean? You know what I'm
Yes.
saying? It's an individual.
Yeah.
So
Exactly. And the one thing that I'll bring up about it being a clump of cells is that, like, you know, I mean, pretty much anything that's living is a clump of cells, whether that be like an organ inside of you. The baby's a clump of cells, but like I'm a clump of cells. Like weed in my driveway is a clump of cells. The tree in my
Yeah.
backyard is a clump of cells. The dog, the cat, like all of these things that are living, currently living, or even in some cases not living, can
Yeah.
be classified as a clump of cells. So like, but I think that's just a point of like, not necessarily dehumanizing, but devaluing what is actually inside of the womb of a woman.
Yeah.
And I think it's, you know, kind of sad that we would get to that point where, you know, you're like, oh, you know, this thing doesn't matter, even though it's completely innocent. It's its own unique DNA of
Yeah.
somebody that
it-
has never existed before.
I think, you know, it's like the heart. One of the things I struggle with grasping is what makes it different just because it's out of the womb
Yeah.
and now in breathing air. I mean,
Mhm.
all of a sudden it is that when it becomes human? No, it was human back here.
Yeah.
You just choose, and there are some people that say, well, yeah, there's a stage in I don't know what trimester and all that, then it becomes human, because there are these folks that say, well, I'm okay with it in trimester 1 or
Yeah.
the first X number of weeks, but it's always been what it is.
Yeah.
It's just in a different size,
Site,
a different form. It's developing.
Yeah.
And Ren, we talked about earlier is that dependency. Yeah, it's dependent in the womb, but it's going to be
Just as
dependent for many
dependent
years
outside
outside of the
Yeah.
womb. You know, it's like you can't just, oh, here we go. We're just going to set it on the floor. It's going to figure
Yeah,
everything out.
yeah.
It's not.
Well, and that goes back to the parasite argument, because a parasite, I think the technical definition, and this is a paraphrase, so it's probably not word for word correctly, but a parasite is like some sort of organism that cannot live outside of its host. And so they make that argument. Well, the baby cannot live outside of the mother, especially before the point of viability, which is, I think, as early as 20 weeks, but generally 22 to 23 weeks is when, like, if in an emergency situation they had to take the child, it has at least a chance of being able to survive.
Developed enough to where,
and being able to survive. But to your point, that kind of doesn't really matter, because even at that point of viability, it might not be in the mother's body any longer, but it is just as dependent upon her and the father and whoever else for its existence.
Mhm.
So just because it can't live without the mother does not mean it's a parasite.
Right. Because again, I mean, there's so many different categories that you'll get into here too.
Well, I was going to say that I don't think there's a magic age to when a kid can,
No.
survive on their own.
Right.
I mean, some kids are,
Yeah,
you know,
because
they-
of their circumstances.
yeah,
they've
I
had
mean,
to do it at
they've
like
had to
8
do it,
years old
yeah,
or something.
but I would
Yeah.
not, a 3-year-old, even a 4-year-old, getting to the point of where could they really survive without some sort of adult intervention? I don't think so.
I doubt it.
And
Yeah.
that's the thing. Like, it doesn't necessarily, to me, matter if, you know, they're in the womb for 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, you know, however long, versus 2 months out, 6 months out, a year out.
Yeah.
You know, it's not
Yeah.
like, well, we were, you know, it really isn't funny, but it's just like crazy that some people would think this way. There was a story in the news, I think it was a year, maybe 2 years ago, where she just went on vacation, left her 1-year-old in the pack and play at home with a few bottles of milk, and just went on vacation, you know, and that's completely unacceptable, like, and immoral to do when they're outside of the womb. And it should be the same principle inside of the womb too. But, you know, there's, you know, a good percentage of people that would have had no problem if she had just gone and gotten an abortion instead, so that she could go on vacation. And that's how I think a lot of people view this issue. But, you know, both of them, whether you know, kill them in the womb or whether you leave them at home so you can go on vacation, you're killing a child in both cases. And so I think, kind of moving on to the next point here, that I don't think matters the different stage that they're at. And I had a quote in here somewhere that said that that it's not a potential human life. In a sense, it is, but it's not a potential human life. It's a life at a different stage of development. You know, whether that stage be zygote or, you know, conception, zygote, fetus, you know, eventually when the baby is born. All those are also considered babies that I just listed. But anyway, when they're born, when they become toddlers, and then adolescent, adulthood, you know, there's different stages of development. And even like the brain particularly, I think the male brain doesn't develop until like the mid-30s or something.
Oh, I thought it was 25.
Yeah, there's different numbers.
I don't know. Maybe I think that because my brain isn't developed. I don't know.
Yeah, you're gonna have to get smarter. But yeah. So, but you know, you can't just go out and, you know, just for the same reason you can't go out and kill you know, a 12-year-old because they're not fully developed.
Yeah.
You know, that doesn't make sense to kill them in the womb either, just because, you know, they haven't been born yet. And also along those same thing, you know, if you don't believe that life begins at conception, when is that? You know, is it measured by that brain activity? Is it measured by the heartbeat?
Mm-hmm.
Is it measured by, you know, consciousness essentially? But if you go with brain activity, again, you know, the male brain doesn't develop until like mid-20s or mid-30s, depending on the source you read. But with that, people go into comas. And so, you know, if I go into a coma right now, like, hopefully nobody's going to come and kill me and think that that's acceptable. Same thing if you think it's heartbeat. Okay, well, first of all, that is detectable. It's probably there, but it's detectable between 6 and 8 weeks. So in the first trimester there. But even you have several people of varying ages that have a pacemaker. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if their heart just stops beating, you know, it's still like nobody can like come and kill them on purpose. That would obviously be murder. For consciousness, first of all, we, you know, sleep every day. We'll leave that one to the side for now. But, you know, kind of again, coma, like if you're going based on just how aware, how sentient someone is, then that becomes a slippery slope too, because there's a lot of different situations. Again, I list the example of a coma, or just the fact that, you know, people kind of have different levels of consciousness, especially in those early stages. You know, like there's different level of consciousness for a 2-month-old outside of the womb versus a 1-year-old outside of the womb versus a 2-year-old and versus a 5-year-old. And I read something that said that until children are about somewhere between 2 or 3, about 2.5 years old, they really don't have a concept of like self-consciousness. And even the first several months, I think like that, like when they see their mother, they think that like them and their mother
they're the same person.
are one.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So, and I think that's like actually really cool.
I do too.
But
I'm
all
a little
that
jealous of it, but I think it's cool.
I know, like, come on, like,
Yeah,
am I
really.
not good enough for you? Like, but all that to say, if you draw the line anywhere other than conception, then it becomes kind of a slippery slope if you're going to be morally consistent. So,
well, and if you don't draw it there, I don't think that you really can be morally consistent.
and also, what is it in those,
Yes.
like, until the heartbeat or whatever, like, you want to define,
Because
what
then
is it?
it gets into, because if you don't define it there, it gets so subjective. So, I mean, immediately it just all becomes objective or subjective, excuse me, as far as when, because one person might think it's when they have a heartbeat. Another person might think, well, when there's brain activity. Another person might think at the point of viability at 20 to 23
when it has
weeks.
fingers.
Yeah, I mean, it could be all sorts of different answers to different people in different contexts and different settings, and so it just becomes way too subjective if you don't define it at conception.
I think we should follow the science.
Yes,
That's what I think we should do. Anything you wanted to add on that, Ryan? I'll throw one more thing in. Also, speaking of it being a clump of cell, that word fetus, I don't know if you guys looked this up, but do you know what it means?
Little human or little child.
Little human or little
What you said
child. So
earlier.
it's like an Italian word that literally means like little child. And so here's another counter argument that I've heard that the government or legal system shouldn't reflect your morals. In other words, like Christian morals, essentially. But I think that's really ironic, considering that most major laws, at least, are based on a moral principle of some kind. Even if it's not a Christian principle, which most of them are. Murder, I don't think we want to get rid of that one. Stealing, lying, like all of the major things in society that there are specific laws against, they're based in a moral principle, most of which are kind of have their origins from the Bible and biblical principles. Kind of with this, a lot of the argument that government shouldn't reflect your morals, this is also where, the concept of that men shouldn't decide for women since they don't have to carry the baby, since, a lot of government leaders are men. Basically, the idea that women should have the freedom and the rights to do whatever they want. And this is kind of what we were talking about earlier, that, I don't have the right to do anything that I want. And if I do, that definitely doesn't mean that I'm free from the choices. So like, taking our example from a while ago, if I like broke into your house, I'm probably going to get charged with a crime, and that would be the consequence. Even we don't really extend this to other aspects either. If I go out and like drink myself silly, then I may die of alcohol poisoning, or I'm going to have a really bad hangover the next day, or cancer might be in my future. Like there's so many different side effects that are going to be natural consequences. And this probably isn't going to come as a surprise that sometimes pregnancy is the consequence. Yeah. Well, not the consequence, but it is a consequence in a sense, but the effect of having sex. So if you're going to go down that road, and then, well, surprise, I'm pregnant. It's really shouldn't be that big of a surprise.
What did you expect?
You're pregnant? I thought you said earlier none of us would be.
Yeah. Oh, just a hypothetical. But okay. Well, 1 for 3. Just kidding. So. But it shouldn't really come as that big of a surprise. And again, we're talking about 99.5%-ish of abortions are just that, oh no, I'm pregnant, and now, now I don't want to deal with this, and it's an inconvenience to my life, and so I'm going to go have an abortion done. It's 99.5% of the time not because I'm going to be at risk or because, of rape or incest or anything like that. So I don't think that that's a very good argument to make there. And another one that I've heard before is that if you outlaw abortions, that people are just going to do it illegally. And though I think that they may be correct in that, how many lives are you actually saving? Like, how important is it to you?
But that's like, that's like saying don't have any laws because people are just going to...
Yeah, they're going to break them. That's
Exactly.
like saying, well, people are going to steal, so let's just make it legal.
Yeah.
People are still going to murder, so let's just make it legal.
Yeah,
Exactly.
It makes no sense. And the truth of the matter is while some might still do it illegally, it will drastically reduce the amount of abortions that are taking place.
Right. And that's kind of the point that I wanted to make is, how many lives are you actually saving? Because all of the argument here will take the moral high ground and say, well, they're going to do it anyway, so we need to provide it where it's, safe and it's not going to, lead to some kind of, infection or, well, I guess an infection essentially. But again, I just struggle with this because, hypothetically, if all abortions were outlawed, you're talking about millions of lives saved per year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's pretty important to me, especially since they're, innocent.
Yes.
You're talking about laws. I mean, we have laws in our country that if someone harms the mother and the child dies in the womb or the mother dies, we have laws where that's considered, if both of them die, double homicide. Why is that? Why does the action or the end result of the action, which is the same in my opinion, why is it okay in one situation and not? To have a double, there would have to be two separate entities that were
two human
killed,
lives.
right?
Yes.
So,
I think what this goes back to is kind of where we started, and that is that third person, that third baby, does that have intrinsic value? Does it have natural rights? Is it worthy of protection, or is it not? So I think that's kind of, at least for that one, it's not like a woman versus man issue. Woman's part of that conversation, as is man, as is the child in that case. So the child has to be considered, especially since, it's an innocent life, it hasn't done anything wrong. And that's kind of where we went to with kind kind of this discussion when it involved rape too. You know, you have that third entity.
Mhm.
Okay. Another thing that I wanted to kind of get into is that it's often said that, well, you aren't forced by law to have a homeless person in your house. So if they live with you, then you can allow it, but you can kick them out at any point. Shouldn't it be the same for, you know, getting an abortion? So what would you guys say to someone who said that to you?
No.
Good answer. Good answer. I think we'd be all in agreement here. Just again, you know, this is not, you know, you kind of invited the homeless person into your house
Yes.
by, you know, choosing to have sex in this analogy. You know, it's not like it's like breathing in a human need in that case.
And also, it really, if you're gonna try to make a parallel analogy with that, it would not be kicking the homeless person out of your house.
Killing them.
It would be killing them.
Mm-hmm.
It would be kick them out and then shoot them in the head. That's more parallel with what you're saying there.
Because they get to go out and live their life.
Yeah,
in
after
someone
that point,
else's
yeah.
house or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
agreed.
And I think another thing is like this is, it's not like we have multiple lives here. You know, what we're ending here, if an abortion is the end result, is you're ending the life of that person like forever. They'll you know, of course they'll be with God, but they won't have a life here on
Yeah.
earth. You know, that in period.
Well, I've heard that too. Well, all those babies are going to heaven, so almost talking about it like it's a good thing.
It's like, okay, well, can I kill you just because?
Well, I was,
you're
you
gonna
know,
be in heaven?
and why don't we just
Oh.
let's just, every time somebody gets baptized, let's just,
Just kill 'em.
boom. Yeah. And then they go straight to heaven. You know, if that's the justification for it, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's just the lack of morality, and at least in that argument there. Okay, well, I guess unless you guys had some other things, I was going to kind of wrap up a few things.
That's fun.
I think for me, I think it is an important part of the conversation that it doesn't matter what stage of development it's in. It doesn't matter if it's inside or outside of the womb. It doesn't matter the amount of months, or, you know, once it's outside of the womb, doesn't matter if it's, you know, 6 months, 1 year, a year and a half, 5 years, 10 years. It doesn't matter. Everyone has intrinsic value and natural rights, and either we protect that or we don't. And if you don't believe that it's a life, then it becomes a slippery slope as to where, okay, well, what is it for those first, you know, weeks or month, and also where do you define living versus non-living? What's the moral standard there? Because if you get away from conception, it becomes a very slippery slope to be morally consistent. And before we end, you know, I wanted to talk kind of about natural rights, because I think we all believe in pro-life in this because of our religious background. But I think there's also kind of something that I think of is also America's founding. Now, America's founding was based on religious principles. That's a story for another day. But I wanted to focus on one of those founding principles within all of the colonies, and particularly in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and in the framing of our government, is that concept of natural rights. The main one of those being the right to life. And if somebody doesn't have the right to live, or I'll kind of flip that the other way. I should never, as a person, be able to violate somebody else's natural right to life. You know, I can't end your right to life. And that's because not only do we believe that in a religious sense, but America's founding and America's history is based on that principle. And if you don't have that principle to protect life, especially innocent life, then your society's not going to be able to properly function. And that's why this case and this kind of debate is such an important one to have, because ultimately what it boils down to, do you value the right to life, or do you not value the right to life? And nobody's right to life is more important than anybody else's. It doesn't matter on the size of that person. You know, my right to life is not any more important than Lucas's right to life. It's no more important than Ryan's, than Ren's, than anybody else, no matter what their age is, no matter what country they're from, no matter what their background is, no matter what their economic status is, no matter how popular they are. It doesn't matter. Everybody has that equal right to life. And I think that is at the core of this. And
Yep.
so do we protect that? And do we value that? Or do we allow our own choices and our own, just opinions, for lack of a better way to put that, dictate what should be done? Ryan, did you have something a second ago?
Real quick. I found it interesting that as part of the Hippocratic Oath, a statement in there says, "I will not give a lethal drug to anyone if I am asked, nor will I advise such a plan. And similarly, I will not give a woman a pessary to cause an abortion." And that is from the original translation of Hippocratic's Oath. Pessary was some sort of device to do so. So I don't know if they're okay with it because they do it via a different mechanism, but I thought that was interesting that that's literally in there. And also, I wanted to, from a biblical standpoint, Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verse 5, Solomon writes, "As you do not know the way the Spirit comes to the bones in the womb of a woman with a child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything." Point there is the child in the womb has a spirit. So God sees it as an important being, right? He's given it that spirit. And then just to close, the Bible clarifies that at least Luke uses the same word for referring to John in the womb of his mother. The word translated baby is the exact same word used that Luke writes in Luke chapter 2, verse 12, saying you would find a baby wrapped in swaddling clothing. Inside and outside the womb, same word, guided by the Holy Spirit.
Yep.
So
Right. And even, Old Testament verses like Psalm 139 and Jeremiah 1 talking about how God knew us before we were formed. There's a lot of other verses that we could point to. But something you said, I maybe we'll close with this, is I think the word abortion, our society throws it around too. Like, oh, I'll just have an abortion, when we don't really know what that means. I think the people that get one may know a little more about that, of course. But I think, like, societally, we sometimes advocate for things that we don't really fully understand. What we're talking about there is, I'd say the two most popular ones, an injection takes place that essentially it, poisons the baby, where it suffocates to death inside of the mother as it's running away from the poison, trying to, hug and find comfort in its mother, and running away as it suffocates to death. And, the other one, this one probably happens a little bit earlier, I would assume. They literally have instruments that go inside of the room and kind of break it apart limb by limb, arm getting ripped off, leg getting ripped off. I mean, it's very, gruesome. We're not going to post any videos about this, but if you're going to advocate for having one, I think it's important that, what you're actually entailing. And, just the verb, what am I trying to say? Just like the way that it sounds, just me speaking about it, kind of, brings a tear to some people's eyes, I'm sure. But if you classify that anything other than, tragic and torturous and, at the end of the day, really murder of an innocent life, I don't know how else you would classify it. So sometimes we throw that word abortion around, kind of to paraphrase what's actually being done to the child there. And that's also where we get, it's just a clump of cells. It's again to, take away from that terrible act. So anything else you guys wanted to add before we close? Well, again, if you would like to leave us a comment or send us an email at theconclusionofthematter@yahoo.com, we'd welcome those, and any topic suggestions that you have for us, as we are trucking right through the season here. But as for abortion, you can consider this the
conclusion of the matter.